하나, 둘, 셋. 안녕하세요, 클라우드입니다. Hey guys, Cloud here. Today we're going to be covering the Korean numbers, one of my least favorite topics to cover. We'll find out why, but in general, you're just going to have to memorize the numbers. There's two systems that they use. This is not why I don't like it. I think it's fine. But there's the pure Korean numbers, which is 하나, 둘, 셋, the one that I mentioned. Also, you might see videos of people taking pictures, and they'll often say 하나, 둘, 셋, and then they'll take a picture, 1, 2, 3. You really need to know, I'd say learn up to 30. I haven't actually heard 40 used in real life. I've heard it in a drama, and 50. Actually, I don't think I've heard 50 ever. Just when people are talking specifically about it, but someone just using it in a conversation, I don't think I've heard it. 40, I think I may have heard it in a drama, and then 30, 1 through 30 is fine. The Sino-Korean numbers are a bit easier because going to 20, 30, 40 don't have different numbers. I'm not going to be covering them too much. I'll go over the numbers, but in general, you just have to kind of repeat them until you learn them. We don't go into the super big numbers, which is good because those are confusing. Just because the way English numbers and Korean numbers work. This is why I don't like it. I guess I'll get right into it. Let me show you. I think you guys can see this, right? Yeah. So let me zoom in a little bit. So in English, we go by the thousands. So 1,000. Then you have, so 1,000. We go by 3 zeros. 1,000, a million, a billion, a trillion, quadrillion, etc., etc., etc. In Korean, they actually go by 10,000s. So they go 10,000, 100,000, or 10 million, 10 billion, 10 trillion, 10 quadrillion. And what I mean by they go by 10,000s is they have a name every 10,000. So we have after 1,000, you can get 10,000, 20,000, you can get 100,000. The word 1,000 doesn't change. It only becomes million when you add 3 zeros, right? So once you add 3 zeros, that's when you change the name to million. Then you add another 3 zeros, then it becomes billion. Everything in between is all million, 999 million, everything is in the millions. In Korean, you go, so let's just go through this in English. So I don't usually open up my handy dandy notepad, but 1 has a different name. Then you have 10, right? The name changes from 1 to 10. Then you have 100, 110 are completely different. So this is in English. In English, I can't spell anything for the life of me. And then you have 1,000. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every 3 zeros. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then successively every 3 zeros. Whereas in Korean, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in Korean, you have 1, which is ear, and then you have 10, which is sheep. Then you have 100, which is pek, and then you have 1,000, which is chon. But then you, instead of going to, like in English, where we have a million, they actually have 10,000, which is man. And then they go 10, then they add 3 zeros successively. So what makes it difficult, or what makes it not my favorite topic, is in English I might say a million, but in Korean you would say, my mind is blanking. So 1 million, let me just write down the zeros. This usually helps. Yeah, so in Korean it would be something like this, right? You would have 10,000, then you have 100,000, then you'd have, so 10 man, I have to do this in Korean, I can't do this in English, but basically you would have 10 man, or you'd have 100 man. So man is just 10,000. So if you multiply 10,000 by 100, you get a million. This might be a little bit confusing, because it is. So 100 10,000s gives me a million. It's not called a million in Korean, it's called 100 10,000s. Whereas for us, we call it a million. If that made any sense, that's good. If it didn't, that's fine. You might not have any problems with the numbers. I could just be crazy. I don't think Japanese is the same. Japanese might be the same way, but I'm not sure. All right, let's get into the lesson. So 0, 0, and 콩. So there's also words that you should learn. So words related to numbers. So 처음, the first. 첫 번째, 두 번째. This is all first, second. 마지막, the last. Some counters, very useful counters. 본 and 개. These two are so important. And 명. I think these three are like the most important ones. They're kind of all important. Like 분 and 초, you're gonna have to learn. 살, 시, 참, 태. You're gonna use all of these. But you could almost always classify people with 명. So like 3 people came. So you say 3 명 왔어요. 번 with anything you do. 한 번 했어. I did it once. I did it twice. I did it 3 times. And there's one 한 개 있어. I have one of it. I have 2 of them. I have 3 of them. They're just so versatile. And basically, if you don't remember the counter for something like car, for example, maybe you don't know 태s for cars. You could just say 두 개. You could use 개 instead, and they'd understand you. Whereas if you said 두 명, they wouldn't understand that you're talking about cars. They might understand. It kind of depends on from sentence to sentence. But let's get right into it. Korean numbers are actually very easy once you get the hang of them. I disagree. But because they're so different from English numbers, it's often hard for English speaker to fully understand them at first. If you're at first, I agree with you. I understand them actually. I just haven't practiced them. It's not that they're hard, it's that I have not practiced them enough. Just because I do so much math in English and I never have to do math in Korean. I'm an engineer, so like math, I do a lot of math. First things you need to know. There's 2 sets of numbers. We talked about this. The Sino-Koreans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I should probably go slower. 1 is 1. 2, 3, 4 is 4. So one thing the way I remember it is the first one usually has more letters. So 1 is 3 different letters. The iung, I, and rier. And that's 1. Then when you remove the 받침, the rier, it becomes 2. I. Same thing with 삼. 삼 is 3 letters, 시읒, 아, and 미음. Then when you remove the 미음, the 받침, it becomes 사. I remember learning it that way because it made it easier, because I would always confuse 1 and I, which one's which, 삼 and 사, which one's which. The shorter one is the bigger value. That's how I remember it. 오 is 5, 6 is 6. I think we go over sound change rules here. If not, it may have been in the unit 0 where he talks about reading, but I think for numbers like 6 and what's it called? And sheep, I think we talk about the. Anyways, 8 or 7 is 7, 8 is 8, 9 is 9, and sheep is 10. 100 is 100, 천 is 1,000, and 만 is 10,000. Alright, so with these numbers, they work very similar to the Japanese numbers, where you can create any number from 1 to 10 million. You just put them together. So 1 is 1, sheep is 10. So if you want to say 11, you just put 10 and 1. Kind of like I think also Mandarin we do this. I have not studied Mandarin in a long time. So I'm pretty sure with the characters at least, because I remember I was doing a little bit with the characters. With the characters at least you were able to do that. Because I remember putting like 8 and 7 or 88, 10 and 7 in front of each other to mean 87, but I could just be misremembering. So 20 is just 10 and then 2 and then 10s right after each other. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can go through them at your own pace, just because I feel like this is something you might want to do on your own. So 900 would be 9 and then 100. 10,000 has its own thing, but 50,000 would be 5 10,000s. Alright, the sino numbers are used in limited situations. I feel like the sino numbers are mostly used. I would say the pure Korean numbers are the limited situations, but as each of these lessons are taught throughout the upcoming lessons, you will slowly learn when to use the Sino-Korean numbers over the Korean numbers. I'd say most situations, honestly. For now, you don't have to worry about memorizing them. They'll come naturally. That's true. So when counting, when dealing with money, you're always going to use it, these numbers. When measuring, when doing math, in phone numbers, when talking about counting time in any way except the hours. So in minutes, you would use these Sino-Korean numbers. For seconds, you would use it. you would not use it for hours. The names of each month, you use the Sino-Korean numbers. Counting months, you can use either or. There's two different ways. Now, pure Korean numbers. So, 하나, 둘, 셋, 1, 2, 3. Then, 넷 is 4, 다섯 is 5, 여섯 is 6, 일곱, 7, 여덟 is 8, 아홉 is 9, 열 is 10. Then 20, 스물, 30 is 서른, 40 is 마흔, 50 is 쉰, 60 is... I can't remember. If I hear it, I'll remember it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, it's not coming to me. All right, but you can basically do the same thing 1 through 19 or 11 through 19, 21. So you can put 10 and 5, 10 and 7. So 열, 아홉, 열, 일곱. You can do that kind of stuff to put in the numbers. So 열, 아홉, 19, 열, 일곱, 17, that kind of thing. This is how you would say how old you are in general. So if you're 18, you would say 열, which is 10, 여덟, which is 18, 열, 여덟, 살이에요. We're going to learn the ending of that in a little bit. Notice, there's no space between the words representing numbers for both the Sino-Korean and pure Korean numbers. And you'll see what he means in a little bit. I discussed this in a much more difficult lesson, 130, big Korean numbers. Oh, interesting. Oh yeah, I remember this lesson. This is where he talks about ok, right? Yeah, 100 million chul. Yeah, okay. Yeah, over 10,000s are used. For now, it's more important to focus on how to use simple numbers in sentences after 60. Regardless of what you're doing, pure Korean numbers are rarely used. It's 예순. Who would have thought? Anyways, I was talking to my wife about this, and she said she didn't think there was even a pure Korean number for 60. I told her, yes, there is. 예순. To which she replied, oh yeah, I forgot. When you get that high, even as high as 40 to 50, it's not uncommon to use the Sino-Korean numbers instead. So the pure Korean numbers, when are they used? This is what I would do. I would remember when the pure Korean numbers are used. If it's not one of these three, or one of the very few situations where you will, just use the regular, or not the regular, the, what is it called? Sino-Korean number. So pure Korean number is the limited edition, or situation, I'd say. So you're counting things, people, actions, how many times you did something, talking about the hour, when you're talking time, so like 3:45 p.m., the 3 would be in these numbers, and then sometimes when you're talking about months, again, there's two different ways. Don't worry about memorizing them. Whenever I talk about numbers, I'll tell you which set you're expected to use. Using numbers, counters. All right, I talked about counters. What are counters? Not everyone here is familiar with Japanese. They might not know what I'm talking about. All right, when counting anything in Korean, you need to use the pure Korean numbers. In addition, one thing that is very hard for English speakers to wrap their heads around, when counting most things in Korean, you need to also include a counter. The most common counters are, haha, look, who would have guessed? It's not like I just mentioned these. There are more, so 개, 명, and 번. There are more counters, but if you can't remember specific, you can substitute 개. This is literally what I just said. I should have just read the lesson. You'll learn more difficult counters in the future. The goal is just to get accustomed to these three guys. When counting in English, we don't usually use counter. Rather, we just say two people, as in I met two people. But some things in English require the use of counters. I did not know that. For example, you would not say I bought 2 films, referring to the film of camera, not a movie. You would say I bought 2 rolls of film. That's actually true. The word roll in that sentence is a counter and is similar to the Korean counters. The main difference is that counters are used to count almost everything in Korean. So when using counters, so this is also what I was trying to talk about. By sound change rules, I meant like sometimes they look a little bit different. The words 1, 2, 3, 4 lose their 받침, and so does 20. So 하나 becomes 한, 둘 becomes two, so 두 번, 한 번, 두 번. You may have heard those. 세 and 네 instead of 셋 and 넷, and then 스물 becomes 스무. 스무. Place a number and then the counter. So 사람 2명, 사람 1명, 사람 5개, or I should not have said that. I wasn't reading. 펜 5개. You wouldn't want to call a person a 개. That's not very nice. And 펜 44개. 44 pens. So that's how you'd use it. You'd use 개 because a pen is a thing. It's also possible to put the number counter combination before the noun that is being counted. However, The method shown above this is much more common than what we're about to see. So I'm just not going to go over it because why not? It's already confusing enough. The purpose, just skip this guy. It's less common. Lesson 23. I don't remember what that lesson is. Irregular Korean colors. Okay. When writing out words instead of using the numeral, so for example, when you write down han instead of one, so in English, instead of putting the number 1, you would put O and E. The correct form is to have a space between the written number and the counter. I almost never do that. I almost always put 한개 and 두번 or 한번, and maybe with 명 I might have a space, but at least specifically with 한개 and 한번. I thought 한번 was its own word, to be honest. I thought you could just combine them. When Korean numbers are used, the word is more typically used than the numeral. That's true. So when I would write 한번, I wouldn't write 1, the number 1, and then 번. I would probably type in HAN or hiut and nian. HAN. All right, you'll see the Korean word written out. In other situations where Sino-Korean numbers are used, there's no difference if you use the numeral or if you use the word itself. We'll talk about this next lesson when we learn how to use the Sino-Korean numbers. So these nouns that we counted now before can become the object of a sentence. So you can say 나는 펜 4개를 샀어. I bought 4 pens. 나는 햄버거 2개를 먹었어. I ate 2 burgers. Again, we're adding the counters. And then 나는 어제 친구 5명을 만났어. I met 5 friends yesterday. The number counter combination could also be placed before. I'm not going to go over that. Again, if you want, you can check it out. I think it's just adding a little bit too much to the lesson. Although the placement, I guess it's good that he mentions it, but I wouldn't. Although the placement of the particle is important, eventually you'll be more comfortable with omitting it. I wouldn't recommend it. He wouldn't recommend it for beginners because you want to get a really, really, really solid understanding of how to use them, because sometimes you're going to have to use them and you don't want to be omitting them from right now because you want to be playing it safe, and then when you have to use it, not know what to use, or when you end up using it, you say it wrong and people are confused. So you can use them perfectly for more complex sentences. Nonetheless, most often the speech particles in this situation are often omitted. So you will hear 4개 샀어. I bought 4 of them instead of 4개를 샀어. It's also possible to put the particle on the actual object. So 나는 펜을 4개 샀어 instead of 나는 펜 4개를 샀어. Try not to worry too much. So you can see these 3. Here the 를 is on the 개, here the is on pen, and here just omits it. Alright, here are some more examples of counters in use. 그 사람은 차 4개, 대개. Oh my god, I can't Korean. 그 사람은 차 4대가 있어요. 저는 우유 2잔을 샀어요. 저는 땅콩 2개를 먹었어요. I ate 2 peanuts. 땅콩 is a funny word because my niece, when she was still learning how to speak, this is one thing about child learning languages, this language acquisition. Children make a bunch of sounds. That's why, like, if a child is a native or grows up learning a language, they almost never have pronunciation, or you don't think when they grow up they don't have pronunciation problems. They pronounce it like a native because when they're children, they have the capability of saying anything. They just have to refine it. And you'll hear children making noises that their parents never make and that the kids have never heard before because they're practicing their vocal cords. And one thing I heard my niece saying 땅 and 콩, which doesn't exist in English, at least for 땅. Maybe 콩, even 콩, it's not really English pronunciation. And she said that and I was so surprised. And then my sister was telling me, yeah, kids, that's how they just make noises that might not be in the language. She also makes other noises she also made other noises that weren't really in the language. And she was like just experimenting with her vocal cord, and then she narrows down to the ones that she does need to use, and those are the ones she becomes proficient in, and then she kind of doesn't really practice any of the other ones. So I just thought that was really a cool tidbit with peanuts. All right, 0. I figured since I'm talking about numbers, I'm sorry, my eyes are a bit tired today. I stared at a screen for 5 14 hours now I've been working, so makes sense that my eye is a bit tired. I figure since I'm talking about numbers, I should mention something about how and when the number 0 is used. So the number 0 is, it's not confusing, it's just needs to be talked about. Just like other numbers, there's 2 ways to say 0 in Korean. However, unlike other numbers, both ways are of Chinese origin. Yong, which from what I understand, the way Chinese people say 0, I'm going to ask my Chinese friend about that because I don't remember. I don't think I learned that. And Kong, which is sort of like the meaning of nothing. That's not very important, but what is important is knowing which word to use in which situation. Yong. All right. Points that can be given or taken away, like in a game. For example, when you say 2-0, I would say 이 대 영. Another example would be if you're in a quiz show and you ask your friend how many points she has, she could say 영점, 점 meaning points. The temperature is 0, so 영 would be used for that. And when using numbers in math, which if you're just learning Korean now, you probably won't do for a long time. I don't know how to do math in Korean. I just realized. I learned plus, minus, multiply, divide, all that stuff. But I think once I got to fractions and I was like, hold up. You mean to tell me 3/4 is 4 of 3? Like what? Or 4 comes before 3. Actually, that's something I should have added in my previous video talking about general versus specific because they talk about the bigger number first. But once I saw fractions, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to learn that. And I kind of forgot how to do that stuff. Kong, phone numbers. For example, when you're saying 010555555, this would be Kong, Ir Kong, Sorry. If you don't live in Korea, you probably won't know this. But Kong, Ir Kong is a typical area code for cell phones in Seoul, at least. Therefore, when giving your phone number, you usually start out by saying Kong, Ir, Kong. All right, bon, the counter for actions, or things that you do. Bon is a common counter that counts actions. And it's not directly counted with a noun in a sentence. So putting a number before bon creates an adverb that tells you how many times you do something. So you wouldn't say like 3 times cloud. You'd say like I ate 3 times. So it would be related to eating. It would be an adverb, something that describes the verb. It's an adverb, so 를 or is usually not attached to it. So 저는 어제 학교에 3번 갔어요. I went to school 3 times. 저는 그 영화를 5번 봤어요. I saw that film 5 times. I can't even watch a movie once 5 times. That's crazy. 저는 오늘 2번 운동할 것입니다. I will exercise twice or 2 times today. 저는 어제 고기를 2번 먹었어요. I ate meat twice yesterday. That sounds like a good day. 저는 오늘 축구를 4번 할 거예요. I will play soccer 4 times today. That sounds like an awesome day. That sounds like a perfect day to me. This is fairly simple to use, but you'll continue to learn about this word in the next lesson when you learn how to say this time, next time, and last time. All right. Telling Korean time. We talked a little bit about it here and there, but now we're actually going to jump into it. There are many different ways to talk about time. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, blah, blah, blah. You will learn more about this in the next lesson, but in this lesson, we're going to tell time as in like what time is it? 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. When talking about the hour, as in 2 o'clock, all you need to do is add she next to the number. So 2she. So you're going to use the pure Korean numbers for the hour. So 2she. Then when you're talking about minutes, you add 분, 30분. So the pure Korean numbers are used when saying the hour. Sino-Korean numbers are used when saying the minutes. For example, 2시 30분. You can see he wrote it down here, 2:30. Earlier in the lesson, I said that when a pure Korean number is used with a counter, it's more commonly written out instead of using a numeral. In this case, she can be seen as a counter as we're counting hours. However, writing the numbers of the word is equally as common and acceptable when referring to the time. In my case, I much prefer to use the numerals. Basically, you could write it like this, right? Like, come on. Okay, I give up. I can't highlight there you go, like this, or like this, and it doesn't really matter, but he just prefers to write it this way. To indicate the minutes, Sino-Korean numbers are used. just like all the times where Sino-Korean numbers are used. There's no difference in writing it out or putting the number. Hierarchy prefers to use the numbers. The spacing of these also needs to be discussed. As I mentioned earlier, when writing numbers, when a written number is used, when a written number is I can't read, what's wrong with me? When a written number is placed before a counter, there should be a space between the number and the counter. This is true for the number before 분 as well. So 30분 should have a space, 2시 should have a space. However, when writing the numerals, you can omit the space. Officially, there should be a space. However, most people don't put the space. And it's also seen as correct to omit it. So you can put 10분, and there wouldn't be a problem. You will see more examples of this next lesson when you learn the applications of numbers. If you can't get it into your brain, it'll be easier once you see more examples next lesson. Why is my camera like this today? It's very blurry for some reason. It's never done that to me before. Oh well. All right. These times can go into sentences. So you can say, I did this at 10:30. We learned this like very early on, lesson 4 or 5, where I went to the park, or I did this yesterday. Well, now you know, you can say, or I did this at the park. You can say, I did this at 3:30. I did this at 5. I will eat at 5. 나는 5시에 먹을 거야. Like that. I want to end this in a little bit, just because I'm having trouble reading. When indicating how old a person is, you should use pure Korean numbers. We talked about this. So 열 would be used instead of 10. So 저는 10살이에요. I'm 10 years old. 저의 여자친구는 26살이에요. My girlfriend is 26 years old. Now Korean numbers are different than, our Korean age is different than American age, but I'll keep that for later. It would sound weird to use the Sino-Korean numbers to talk about someone who's under 30. However, after 30, it's not uncommon to use either or. The older the age, the more likely you are going to use the Sino-Korean numbers instead of pure Korean numbers. After 50, most likely you're going to hear it exclusively Sino-Korean numbers. You haven't learned how to ask a question yet, so it's difficult to explain how to ask a person's age. But here's a common phrase you can just memorize. 몇 살이에요? How old are you? 번째, first, second, third. So you would add 첫 번째 instead of 한 for first. So first, 첫 번째, the first thing is this. 두 번째, second. 세 번째, third. Also, you can say my first friend. 저의 첫 번째 친구는 착했어요. I didn't like that first chorus. 첫 번째 차를 싫어했어요. Oh yeah, so if you think this is confusing, why is it 첫 번째 instead of like 한, 두, 하나, 둘? Just think of it like this. One gets changed to first, 2 gets changed to second, 3 gets changed to third. So when we're talking about first, second, third, it also changes in Korean. After first, you stop using 첫, and you're going to see 첫 in different places, so you're going to get comfortable with it. So don't worry too much about it. But 두 번, 세 번, 네 번, and then after that, words don't change, so you don't have to worry about like 다섯 번. You just say 다섯 번째, and then you can read the sentences. I can't read today for some reason. 저는 백 번째 페이지를 읽었어요. Sometimes you might see these numbers plus counters used in the following way. 첫째, 둘째, 셋째, 넷째. You just get rid of the 번 because it's kind of already assumed. It's shortened. These shortened forms can't be used in as many situations as longer counterparts, but the most common situations where these are used is when talking about your first, second, third, etc. children. For example, 우리 둘째 아들은 고등학생이에요, our second son. In these cases, it's common to refer to the child as first one or one's second. We often do the same thing in English. So our second child is a high school student. In Korean, 우리 둘째는, without adding the other, 고등학생이에요. However, as I mentioned, it would be unnatural to use these words in sentences like 저는 첫째 문을 열었어. Yeah, it would be understandable, but quite awkward. So I just say use the full version unless you know for a fact that you can use the shorten. Another place you'll see words like 첫째 and 둘째 is when making lists about things need to be done, and the speaker is indicating firstly and secondly. So for example, 첫째, 저는 야채를 많이 먹겠습니다. First, I will eat a lot of vegetables. 둘째, 저는 매일 운동하겠습니다. Second, I will exercise daily. Never mind. I didn't make audio recordings for the above sentence because I feel they would more likely be written than spoken. Another useful word is 마지막, which often translates to last. It is often confusing for English speakers to understand the usage of 마지막 because at first the word last has many more usages in English. So 마지막 is used to refer to the final thing at the sequence, as in first meal, second meal, third meal, last meal. It's not like, oh, last time I did this. It's more like the final time. So last night is the previous night versus the last night of our trip. So the final night, like what I said. The second example would be where you could use 마지막 because you're referring to the final night of a sequence. In the first example, you're talking about the previous night, which you use 지난. So 지난 날에, 지난 달에, whatever you're trying to say. So 마지막, 이것은 저의 마지막 수업이에요. This is my last class. Not as in like, oh, last class I saw this. It's like, no, this is my final class. All right. In these examples, 마지막 is being used this relatively long lesson. 마지막 is being used as a descriptive word even though it's not an adjective in its original form. So it like doesn't end in ta. Words can be used this way in English. The word face is a noun, but I put on face paint. The word face is describing paint. Like computer room. Again, computer is a noun, but it's used as an adjective. You don't have to worry too much about. 처음 is the opposite of 마지막. It's literally the first. So 처음에 그 여자를 싫어했어요. At first I didn't like her. Like that girl. 저는 처음에 체육 수업을 싫어했어요. At first I didn't like PE class. You could use that as an adverb. First time something has happened. So 저는 어제 선생님을 처음 만났어요. 처음 봤어요. It's my first time seeing it. Or it was my first time seeing it. 처음 what was it? 만났어요. First time meeting. 저는 내일 한국에 처음 갈 것입니다. I will go to Korea for the first time tomorrow. Alright, that was a long lesson. We'll end it here. Over 30 minutes. I tried to not have the lessons that long, but again, you can watch them in separate goes, so don't worry too much about that. And after this lesson, I will have a lesson, not like lesson 11, but it'll be like a break, and I'll say, this is what you know, this is what you should be doing next. And this is my recommendation for ways on improving what you already know. So look forward to that, and I'll see you guys next time.